Welcome back. Tonight, we step into corridors seldom spoken of behind the marble halls of St. Peter's, where faith and fascination collide. What if the Vatican's greatest masterpieces weren't just frescoes or relics, but experiments in bending time itself? Beneath candlelit sanctuaries and dusty archives, whispers tell of clocks that ran backwards and manuscripts promising a journey beyond our own era. Yet for every spark of wonder there are shadows of ambition and peril, reminding us that even divine power can carry a dark edge. Before we unravel these mysteries, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if these adventures truly call to you. And please drop a comment sharing where you're watching from, and what time it is where you are. I love seeing this quiet constellation of curious souls around the world. Now, soften the lights, let a gentle hush fill the room, and prepare to drift into a story of beauty, darkness, and the tantalizing promise of time travel. Beneath the soaring dome of St. Peter's, where centuries of faith meet marble and mystery, a question lingers in hushed corridors. Could the Vatican, custodian of ancient wisdom, secretly hold a device that bends the flow of time? For nearly 2 millennia, the Holy See has gathered priceless manuscripts, relics, and codices, beginning with Constantine's founding of the first Basilica in the 4th century, and continuing through the Counter-Reformation era, when popes like Paul V commissioned hidden libraries. In 1612, Paul V officially established the Vatican's archival collections, now known as the Vatican Apostolic Archive, locking away documents that range from papal correspondence to scientific treatises once deemed heretical. Yet legends persist of pages so advanced they describe celestial mechanics and temporal paradoxes far ahead of their era. Some scholars point to forgotten marginalia in 16th century codices by polymaths employed under Gregory XIII during the calendar reform of 1582, hinting at experiments that sought more than calendar accuracy. Standing in the silent halls, one can almost hear the echo of turning pages and the soft hum of hidden machinery. These walls have witnessed Galileo's trial in 1633, the suppression of Copernican ideas, and a century later the Jesuits' astronomical observations through the Gregorian Tower Observatory. If any institution had the motive and means to explore the boundaries of time, it would be this convergence of faith and inquiry. But is this merely romantic conjecture, or did the Vatican actually pursue the science of temporal travel? By the mid-15th century, as Renaissance humanism flourished in Rome, whispers of temporal experiments began to circulate among scholars who had gathered in the newly founded Vatican Library. Pope Nicholas V inaugurated the library in 1451, assembling Greek manuscripts looted after the fall of Constantinople 2 years earlier. Among those texts were works by Plotinus and Proclus, reintroducing Neoplatonic ideas about eternity into Western thought. Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, who studied in Rome in the 1480s under papal patronage, wrote ambitious orations blending Hermetic lore with Christian doctrine. His famed Oration on the Dignity of Man suggested that human beings could ascend through knowledge to divine-like power, a notion that some claimed included mastery over time itself. Cardinals and clerics, entranced by these arcane philosophies, purportedly funded secret workshops in the Vatican's dungeons, where alchemists such as Ulrich von Hutten tested mercury-based elixirs thought to slow or reverse decay an essential first step toward controlling temporal flow. Meanwhile, the completion of the Sistine Chapel in 1483 under Pope Sixtus IV provided fresh walls on which rumored ciphered diagrams appeared, visible only by torchlight, hinting at clockworks capable of dividing the hourglass beyond human perception. Though official records, including the register of the Apostolic Camera, make no mention of these clandestine activities, correspondence between willing participants survives in obscure folios, yet remains sealed behind iron clamps. As the humanists' pursuit of Platonic ideals met with the Church's desire to preserve divine order, rumor and rumor's refutation went hand in hand. In the candlelit hush of the Vatican corridors, it was hard to know whether these tales were mere flights of erudition or the first stirrings of a quest to bend the river of time. Deep beneath the polished marble floors of St. Peter's lies a labyrinth of corridors and vaults few outsiders have ever glimpsed. In 1612, Pope Paul V formally established the Vatican Apostolic Archive, entrusting it with papal documents dating back to the early 4th century. For centuries, these secret archives were accessible only to select clergy until Leo XIII opened limited sections to scholars in 1881. Even today, the archive contains more than 80 kilometers of shelving packed with letters, treaties, and unpublished theological treatises. Among them are late 15th century codices attributed to Lorenzo Valla's circle, whose marginal notes speculate on the nature of temporal causality in ways that verge on modern physics. Other parchments describe the work of obscure Jesuit researchers in the 17th century Gregorian Tower Observatory, where consultants noted inexplicable disruptions in pendulum motion during certain astrological alignments. These manuscripts remain secured behind iron doors bearing papal seals, their keys entrusted to only 2 high-ranking prelates. Rumors persist of hidden compartments accessed through concealed mechanisms, where prototype devices once lay stranded when curiosity crossed the Church's line between inquiry and heresy. Clerics who petitioned for access speak of corridors where time seems to slow, of drafts that chill the bones, and of the faint metallic scent of long-dormant machinery. Official inventories record only generic labels such as Mechanica or Astronomia, leaving researchers to wonder whether these entries refer to simple observational instruments or to far more audacious creations. Standing in those subterranean aisles, one cannot help but feel the weight of centuries of secrecy and the tantalizing possibility that among those dusty volumes lie the blueprints for something that could transcend history itself. In the shadowed alcoves of Renaissance palaces and the hushed workshops of ecclesiastical scholars, a select few clerics donned cardinal's robes not only to lead masses, but to oversee experiments blending faith with nascent chemistry. By the early 1500s, alchemy had evolved beyond the pursuit of gold to include investigations into life's essence and the mechanics of decay. Cardinal Giovanni de' Medici, later Pope Leo X, reportedly funded an alchemical laboratory near the sacristy of Santa Maria sopra Minerva, where friars extracted tinctures from cinnabar and quicksilver, believing these substances held keys to slowing the passage of time. In their records, preserved in the Vatican's manuscript collections, are cryptic references to etheric elixirs and eternal tinctures. Meanwhile, Cardinal Robert Bellarmine, in the late 1500s, corresponded with Jesuit scientists at the Collegio Romano about retorts capable of distilling rare salts under vacuum, a technique centuries ahead of its widespread adoption in European laboratories. Although the Inquisition condemned charlatans and banned certain texts, these high-ranking patrons protected their research by labeling it as theological inquiry into the Creator's design. Documents from the Vatican Library describe how, beneath the guise of studying relic purification, alchemists tested leaded glass chronometers and proto-aberometers to measure shifts in atmospheric pressure thought to influence temporal flow. When Pope Urban VIII reaffirmed Galileo's condemnation in 1633, some suspect he simultaneously curtailed the Church's more speculative ventures. Yet correspondence unearthed in private collections speaks of clandestine devices hidden behind ornamental tapestries, powered by mechanisms resembling clockworks but constructed from gilded brass and petricon copper alloys. These machines, if they ever existed, would have bridged laboratory curiosity with ecclesiastical ambition, offering a glimpse of how close church scholars came to experimenting on the very fabric of time itself. When Pope Gregory XIII decreed the calendar reform in 1582, he did more than correct the drift of equinoxes and solstices. He inadvertently opened a window into the very architecture of time. Commissioned by the pontiff, physician Aloysius Lilius and mathematician Christopher Clavius devised a system to realign the Julian calendar, omitting 10 days in October and introducing a new leap year rule that dipped through centuries to keep seasons constant. These adjustments were proclaimed by papal bull on February 24, 1582, and implemented in Italy, Spain, and other Catholic realms that October, yet in Protestant lands the change was met with suspicion and delay. Hidden within the mathematical tables that guided parish priests were annotations in Latin script referencing tempus fractum, or fractured time, suggesting that the reformers perceived time as malleable rather than absolute. Clavius's correspondence with German astronomers contains marginal calculations that push beyond liturgical accuracy into theoretical models of time loops and retrograde intervals. Some modern researchers point to a volume in the Vatican Library marked simply Calendaria, where unusual sketches of clock faces appear alongside diagrams of planetary conjunctions. These images resemble nothing so much as plans for devices designed to invert or pause the forward march of hours. While no official record admits to such ambitions, the rigor and secrecy surrounding the Calendar Commission hint at an appetite for control over time itself. Standing in the Sistine Staircase corridor beside frescoes that celebrate heaven and earth, one can almost imagine an encoded formula scratched into the stone's mortar, a whisper from the 16th century beckoning us to consider that time, like faith, can be shaped by human hands. As scaffolding rose beneath Julius II's patronage in 1508, Michelangelo Buonarroti embarked on his monumental task of painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling, a commission completed in 1512. Yet, beyond the biblical narratives of Genesis and the prophets, legend holds that Michelangelo concealed within his frescoes schematic diagrams, hinting at mechanisms of unparalleled ingenuity. Some art historians point to the subtle curvature of the panels illustrating the creation of Adam, where the contours of God's celestial cloak mimic the arcs of gear teeth. In preparatory sketches preserved in the Casa Bucklesh Codex, faint annotations made in charcoal appear alongside studies of putti carrying scrolls. These notes reference tempus motus, or the motion of time. It is said that under ultraviolet examination, faint tracings form concentric circles and interlocking wheels beneath layers of ultramarine and fresco plaster. Cardinal Bibbiena, Michelangelo's patron and confidant, purportedly wrote to his brother in 1513 of hidden mappings that only a disciplined eye, fluent in geometry and divine proportion, could decode. While the Vatican archives make no overt mention of such secret schemata, the codices of Sebastiano del Piombo and Sebastiano Serlio reference conversations with Michelangelo about machines too perfect for mortal hands. In the darkened corner of the Raphael rooms, graffiti left by an anonymous cleric in 1520 depicts a rudimentary clockwork bearing a striking resemblance to the human heart, an image long interpreted as medical allegory, but, some argue, a deliberate clue to a deeper pursuit, the engineering of temporal flow. In these hidden blueprints, the boundary between high art and high science dissolves, suggesting that Michelangelo's greatest masterpiece may have been not just his brushwork, but an invitation to perceive time itself as canvas and mechanism. In the early decades of the 17th century, the Society of Jesus emerged as one of the Catholic Church's most intellectually vibrant orders, dispatching scholars across the globe and into the hidden corners of the Vatican itself. Among them stood Athanasius Kircher, a German Jesuit whose tenure at the Collegio Romano, beginning in 1634, produced works on magnetism, optics, and Egyptian hieroglyphs. Kircher's notebooks, preserved today in the Vatican Library, contain intricate penny and ink diagrams of clockwork assemblies and hydraulic pumps devices. He hypothesized could manipulate the flow of time by altering the rate at which water or sand passed through calibrated chambers. His contemporaries, such as Giovanni Battista Riccioli, noted experiments with weighted wheels designed to counteract the effects of gravitational acceleration, a concept centuries ahead of mainstream physics. Correspondence from 1650 reveals that Kircher petitioned Pope Innocent X for a private workshop beneath the Jesuit residence adjacent to the Pantheon, where artisans created prototype gears fashioned from brass alloys, mixed according to recipes in his Arcana Omniathica. Although no physical remnants of these machines survive, references in the diaries of Jesuit brother Filippo Buonanni speak of gears ticking backwards at certain alignments of the planet's observations made with instruments from the Vatican Observatory, founded in 1580. These engineers sought not mere chronometry, but temporal modulation, blending hydraulic action with pendular motion to suspend or reverse brief intervals of local time. When the Roman Inquisition scrutinized his unorthodox methods, Kircher defended his work as an exploration of God's creation, rather than an act of rebellion. Yet whispers persisted that deep within the Jesuit workshops stood partial assemblies of a chronometer unlike any other, a device that, if completed, might fold the river of time upon itself and grant its operators the most forbidden of powers. Perched atop the Vatican's northern tower since 1580, the Gregorian Tower Observatory served as both a symbol of the Church's embrace of astronomy and a secret laboratory for celestial research. Under the direction of Jesuit, astronomers such as Christophorus Clavius and later Angelo Secchi in the 19th century, the observatory logged countless nights of star measurements, charting comets, novae, and planetary motions with unprecedented precision. Yet among routine observations, researchers recorded inexplicable anomalies. In 1644, during the protracted conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, clocks within the tower's chamber reportedly lost several minutes without apparent mechanical failure. A century later, meteorological logs note sudden temperature fluctuations at high altitude that seem to reverse the local passage of time in brief, shimmering pulses. Northern lights observed over Rome in 1707 coincided with pendulum clocks at the observatory gaining or losing ticks unpredictably, as documented in Secchi's unpublished margins. These odd readings appear alongside sketches of lens, arrays, and mirror assemblies, experiments commissioned by Popes Clement XI and Benedict XIV to amplify the telescope's reach and perhaps to probe deeper cosmic forces. Correspondence between Secchi and Vatican archivists mentions a restricted set of lantern-lit observations conducted in a sealed chamber, where observers reported an uncanny stillness as if the stars themselves momentarily paused. Official logs attribute these episodes to atmospheric refraction and mechanical irregularities, yet private letters hint at a deeper curiosity. Might the motions of the heavens influence more than navigation and timekeeping? Could the fabric of temporal flow be entwined with celestial rhythms? As the world beyond Vatican walls advanced toward Newtonian physics, the Church's skyward watch continued to register phenomena that defied simple explanation, leaving modern scholars to wonder if the observatory's most compelling discovery lay not in distant stars, but in the strange ways time itself seemed to bend under a Roman sky. During the 16th and 17th centuries, the Roman Inquisition wielded its authority not only over theologians, but over those who practiced experimental arts, seen as encroaching on divine secrets. Established in 1542 by Pope Paul III to preserve doctrinal purity, its tribunals often uncovered instruments seized from accused heretics. In archival records from 1591, now housed in the Vatican Apostolic Archive, entries describe confiscated devices labeled aeriform apparatus and tempus instrumentum. One such case involved a Florentine artisan named Vincenzo della Porta, accused of sorcery after crafting a clockwork orb studded with alchemical symbols. Witnesses testified that when the orb's internal gears were set in motion, by candlelight it seemed to pulse with an inner glow, causing nearby candles to flicker out of sync and pendulum clocks to momentarily falter. In another trial from 1627, an itinerant German engineer, Matthias Richter, was arrested for demonstrating a silver box inscribed with arcane formulae. According to the deposition of a Dominican friar, Richter claimed the box could slow the decay of organic matter placed within it for hours longer than nature would allow. The Inquisition's official minutes, drafted under the supervision of Cardinal Robert Bellarmine, condemned these devices as instruments of diabolical magic and ordered their destruction. Yet a secret memorandum from a sympathetic prelate suggests that some prototypes were relocated to hidden chambers beneath the Lateran Palace for study rather than incineration. Scholars believe these instruments may have formed parts of a larger mechanism intended to regulate or reverse temporal flow. As one reads the brittle parchment of these testimonies, the line between heresy and breakthrough blurs, revealing a church torn between fear of the unknown and a relentless impulse to explore the mysteries of time itself. Tucked away behind the ornate balustrades of St. Peter's, there exists a small, scarcely documented chamber, known among a handful of Vatican insiders as the Oratory of the Hours. Constructed during the papacy of Urban VIII in the 1620s, this hidden chapel features an altar crafted by Gian Lorenzo Bernini's workshop under strict commission, though its most remarkable element lies beneath the marble top. According to a fragmentary ledger from 1634, artisans embedded a complex array of bronze gears and weighted pendulums into the altar's foundation, ostensibly to synchronize the tolling of chapel bells with the canonical hours. Yet cryptic marginalia in that same ledger, recorded by a scribe named Paolo Cortesi, hint that the mechanism was designed not merely for liturgical precision, but to temper the pulse of time itself. Visitors who have glimpsed the sealed doorway describe a faint, continual ticking resonating through the frescoed walls, audible only when the chapel doors are closed and the casual clamor of pilgrims falls silent. Archival letters from Bernardino Spada, papal nuncio to France in 1643, speak of observing the oratory's clocks running backward for brief intervals during twilight prayers, a phenomenon he attributed in private correspondence to divine mystery rather than mechanical malfunction. Subsequent renovations under Pope Innocent X in 1645 reportedly preserved the altar's inner workings, though most documentation was lost in the 1676 fire that swept the Vatican's Reformation-era wing. Scholars today debate whether these descriptions refer to elaborate Watteau-driven regulators or to more fantastical devices capable of suspending local time. Standing before the carved ivory tabernacle, one senses that this altar was intended not only to frame the Eucharist, but to frame time itself as a sacred offering, a temporal gateway hidden in plain sight amid the grandeur of St. Peter's. Whispers among Vatican archivists speak of a manuscript known simply as the Codex Temporis, a bound collection of vellum pages whose origin predates Gutenberg's press. Its existence is noted in a 17th century inventory compiled under Pope Alexander VII, yet the codex itself vanished during the papacy of Clement X in the late 1670s. Descriptions from that inventory suggest it contained intricate diagrams resembling tree-like flowcharts, each branch annotated with Latin phrases alluding to the vectors of eternity and folds in the fifth dimension. According to a letter penned by the archivist Giacomo della Porta in 1675, the Codex was reputed to map out the theoretical framework for what we might now call temporal architecture. Scholars of the era, including Athanasius Kircher, are said to have consulted references to the Codex when drafting proposals for hydraulically-powered chronometers at the Collegio Romano. Although no complete copy has survived, fragments believed to be its fragments were rediscovered among misfiled parchments in 1882 bearing geometric inscriptions that echo modern tensor diagrams. These fragments reside in a locked cabinet labeled Mathematicalis Mystici and are accessible only with dual authorization from the prefect of the Vatican Library and the Secretary of State. Modern researchers who have viewed the parchments describe patterns of looping arrows and concentric polygons that suggest instructions for assembling resonant chambers capable of stabilizing time waves. While the authenticity of these fragments remains contested, carbonate dating places their creation in the late 1500s during the intense period of calendar reform and Jesuit experimentation. The mystery of the Codex Temporis endures as both scholarly puzzle and tantalizing legend, hinting at an ambitious project that sought to treat time not as an abstract dimension, but as a malleable element, subject to design and control. In the quiet chambers of Vatican debate, where theology and philosophy intertwined, discussions arose that tested the very boundaries of divine authority and human curiosity. During the 17th century, as Jesuit scholars advanced their experimental work on celestial mechanics and alchemical transformations, theologians grappled with the unsettling notion that time might not be solely the providence of God. In 1637, Cardinal Francesco Barberini convened a private colloquium of theologians at his palace, tasking them to examine whether a human contrivance could encroach upon eternity itself. Transcripts from those sessions, preserved in the Archivio Segreto Vaticano, reveal fierce contention over passages in Augustine's Confessions that treat time as a creation rather than an immutable force. Scholars such as Father Joseph Grimaldi argued that any attempt to alter temporal progression threatened to equate man with the Creator, a heresy punishable by censure. Others, referencing Thomas Aquinas's commentary on divine omnipresence, maintained that God's sovereign eternity could encompass human manipulation without diminishing divine prerogative. In 1642, Pope Urban VIII issued a decree reaffirming that only divine fiat could suspend or reverse time, effectively branding any mechanical endeavor in that direction as suspect. Yet clandestine notes in the hand of a dissenting theologian named Angelo Rocca hint at ongoing experiments hidden from ecclesiastical scrutiny. He recorded observations of clockwork models operated in secret cells beneath the Lateran Basilica, meticulously altering their gear ratios to test the limits of motion. When the Inquisition later examined Rocca's manuscripts, it condemned several passages as dangerous speculation, but left other pages unburned, perhaps to preserve insights into cosmic order. Within this forbidden dialectic, the Vatican grappled with the paradox of pursuing knowledge that risked challenging the very mystery of divine time, leaving a legacy of intellectual tension that reverberates into our own inquiries about the fabric of history. In a secluded alcove of the Apostolic Palace, a journal surfaced in 1684 under mysterious circumstances, red leather-bound confession attributed to Cardinal Pietro Ottoboni, grandson of Pope Alexander VIII. Within its yellowed pages, the cardinal recounted a single night when he claimed to witness the inaugural hum of a hidden device deep below the palace. He described descending a narrow spiral staircase into a vaulted chamber lit by phosphorescent lamps, where he beheld a contraption of brass and silver pipes, its gears turning without ceasing. Ottoboni wrote in hushed Latin of a low vibration that seemed to pulse through the stone walls, causing his own watch to tick backward by nearly 5 minutes before snapping forward as though repudiating the anomaly. He interpreted this phenomenon as the machine's first trial-and experiment to loop local time within a confined space. Fearful of divine retribution and scandal, Ottoboni recorded only a single entry before sealing the confessional and ordering its vault permanently locked. The journal vanished from view until 1923, when it was briefly catalogued by a Vatican librarian before disappearing once more without trace. Scholars who claim to have glimpsed archival notes about the document suggest that Ottoboni's confession remains buried among misindexed inventories and may yet reveal critical eyewitness testimony of Vatican chronomancy in action. His words, preserved only in rumor and fragmented references, stand as a chilling testament to the possibility that a high-ranking prelate may have been present at the birth of something that dared challenge the continuum of time itself. In the annals of Vatican intrigue, few figures loom as large as Cardinal Armand, Jean du Plessis, more commonly remembered as the Black Cardinal of France. Born in 1585, he rose swiftly under the patronage of King Louis XIII and became infamous for his political cunning and austere demeanor. From his position of power, Richelieu maintained close correspondence with Pope Urban VIII, exchanging gifts that included rare manuscripts and exotic mechanical curiosities. Among these presents, according to a covert entry in the Vatican Secret Archive dated 1636, was a clock unlike any seen before, a timepiece whose hands, when set by hidden levers, marched backward for a single hour each midnight. The clock arrived, nestled in velvet within a private audience chamber, its brass face etched with Latin maxims and alchemical symbols. Watches and small pendulums kept in the same room reportedly flickered in response, their movements stuttering as though catching whispered echoes of reversed hours. Within a week, letters to Richelieu's confidants in Paris celebrated the marvel as proof that the fabric of time could be teased into obedience, a notion potent enough to sway alliances and suppress revolts. When the clock was later exhibited to a small circle of cardinals, several reported sensations of vertigo and temporal dislocation phenomena they hastily attributed to overwork or fever rather than mechanical sorcery. Eventually, the device disappeared during the sack of Rome in 1646, when French forces clashed with papal troops. Official reports listed among items lost to chaos, but persistent rumors claim it was whisked away to a secluded wing of the Palais de Luxembourg. Whether this backward-dedicating clock was a mere curiosity or a fragment of a grander chronometric project, it remains an emblem of how political ambition and scientific wonder intertwined at the highest levels of church and state. Descended by candlelight into the Vatican's oldest subterranean corridors, one encounters the ancient crypts beneath St. Peter's, where stone arches curve into shadow. In 1628, under the papacy of Urban VIII, a memorandum was drawn by Monsignor Felice Peretti, later Pope Sixtus V, describing a hidden chamber accessible only through a disguised door in the so-called Grotto of the Popes. Peretti's notes, buried within the Archivio Segreto, recount the discovery of a metal frame embedded in the crypt's foundation, its surface engraved with concentric rings and star patterns. Legend holds that when water was gently poured into its upper basin, droplets dripped along these grooves, each interval measured by a bronze dial capable of registering intervals shorter than a heartbeat. Clerics who witnessed the mechanism spoke of moments when the dripping slowed to a near-eye standstill, then resumed at normal pace, suggesting an uncanny control over temporal flow. Over time, the chamber's entrance was sealed, and references to it were struck from official inventories, yet whispers endured among gravediggers and tomb-keepers of inexplicable stillness in the air, as if time itself had been suspended. In 1814, following the vacuum created by Napoleon's sack of Rome, a French engineer named Jean-Baptiste Morin claimed to have repaired the mechanism using remnants of Venetian clockwork gears found among rubble. His journal, now lost, was said to detail refinements that allowed operators to fine-tune the device's pulse, effectively stretching or compressing local time by precise increments. Whether Peretti's original apparatus ever achieved full chronometric reversal or merely tested brief temporal lags is impossible to confirm. Yet the memory of that cryptic chamber and its drippo-driven altar continues to stir the imagination, a hidden relic of an ambition to tame time within the heart of Christendom. Take a breath. We've only scratched the surface. Subscribe to keep uncovering what's hidden. Throughout the 17th century, a succession of popes demonstrated an unexpected appetite for sponsoring scientific inquiry, a partnership that occasionally blurred the line between spiritual guidance and experimental ambition. Pope Paul V's establishment of the Vatican Library in 1612 laid the groundwork, but it was under the successive pontificates of Urban VIII and Innocent X that patronage extended into fields once deemed heretical. Records from the Apostolic Camera detail annual stipends awarded to scholars at the Collegio Romano, funds used to procure rare chemicals, precision lenses, and early vacuum pumps imported from Northern Europe. These resources enabled Jesuit scientists like Niccolò Zucchi to pioneer reflective telescopes in the 1630s and to observe Jupiter's moons with clarity previously unimaginable. At the same time, papal patronage financed the construction of the Roman College's experimental workshop, where artisans crafted metal alloys according to recipes drawn from Paracelsian texts. Letters from Innocent X, surviving in the Archivio Segreto, refer to tests of eterna materia, compounds said to resist corrosion and potentially stabilize delicate clockwork. While the official purpose of these experiments was to advance astronomy and medicine, private correspondence hints at a covert dimension, verifying whether these materials could sustain devices intended for temporal modulation. An unsigned memorandum from 1656 speaks of chronometric trials, conducted under the supervision of a Jesuit engineer named Matteo Ricci, not to be confused with the earlier missionary, whose notes cite successful live tests of small chronoscopes capable of correcting drift in pendulum motion by redistributing stored energy. Though the Inquisition monitored any suggestion of human agency over time, pontifical endorsement ensured that such research continued under the watchful eyes of Rome's most revered scholars. These intertwined currents of faith and inquiry showcase how papal patronage fostered not only cultural flourishing, but also experimentation that edged ever closer to the forbidden promise of controlling time itself. Legend speaks of a slender, iron key entrusted to an order of silent monks sworn to protect the Vatican's deepest mysteries. Known only in marginal notes as the philosopher's key, It first appears in a 1652 entry of the Archivio Segreto under Pope Innocent X, though its origins may predate that reference by decades. The key's ward is etched with alchemical symbols and a circular inscription that translates to "For all things, time and matter bow." Reportedly crafted by a master locksmith from Padua under the direction of a Jesuit engineer, the instrument was designed to fit a concealed mechanism beneath the Vatican Library's main lectern. Monks who recall its use describe a resonant click that echoes through the vaulted hall when the key turns, followed by a subtle shift in the rhythm of candlelight as those seconds have stretched or contracted. According to a private memorandum attributed to Brother Ambrose Cortesi in 1660, the key could activate a concealed rack of bronze wheels and pendulums buried in the chamber below, initiating a precise modulation of local time within the room. Fearing scandal and theological peril, the monks hid both key and mechanism behind false panels in the lectern, removing all documentation save for cryptic verse, warning that time is not for mortal hands. When the library underwent restoration in 1798 after Napoleon's invasion, the key vanished along with its ledger entry. Some believe it was secreted away by archivists, sympathetic to the device's promise. Others suspect it was confiscated by foreign soldiers and lost to the ages. To this day, the notion of a single object capable of unlocking a chamber where time itself might be shaped remains one of the Vatican's most enduring enigmas. In 1671, the Vatican's corridors echoed not only with prayers, but with clandestine footsteps, as the Inquisition's tribunal convened a secret hearing to address unsettling rumors. Under orders from Pope Clement X, a group of scholars known as the Chronologers, Jesuit scientists, and lay mathematicians were summoned to explain their pursuits. The tribunal records, recently declassified yet scarcely studied, reveal that these men stood accused of stealing God's future by refining machines that could manipulate the passage of time. Testimonies describe how the chronologers presented models of gears and weighted pendulums calibrated to oscillate at variable rates, demonstrating on a small scale the potential to pause or reverse elapsed minutes. Father Alessandro della Rovere, a leading defendant, argued that their work sought only to understand temporal design as part of divine creation, drawing on Augustine's notion that time itself exists within God's eternal memory. Yet Cardinal Paluzzo Paluzzi Altieri, presiding over the trial, viewed these theories as heretical encroachments upon divine sovereignty. The tribunal ultimately imposed a conditional pardon, but demanded the disassembly of any full-scale apparatus and the surrender of all detailed blueprints. Secret annotations in the trial minutes suggest that some members complied only partially, hiding key components within the Collegio Romano's crypts. These hidden machines, scholars speculate, may have formed the nucleus of later experiments under less conspicuous patronage. The trial of the chronologers stands as a pivotal moment when faith and reason clashed over the right to explore time's frontier. It illustrates how the Vatican, while enshrined in spiritual authority, grappled with the profound ethical and theological implications of pursuing knowledge that claimed to traverse the very fabric of God's creation. Walled within towering corridors of carved stone and flickering lamps lies the Vatican's iron libraries, an imposing cluster of chambers sealed by massive doors of reinforced bronze. Constructed in the late 17th century under Pope Innocent XI, these vaults were designed to safeguard not only priceless manuscripts, but also fragile mechanical components, deemed too dangerous for general access. Contemporary accounts describe iron bookcases bolted to the floor, their shelves groaning under codices bound in lead-lined covers and lockboxes, containing brass cogs, copper coils, and glass vials etched with cryptic formulas. A 1,692 inventory ledger lists 200 entries under the classification Mechanica Arcana, though the nature of those items remains shrouded in euphemism. Whispers among librarians tell of retrieving a battered crate marked with the symbol of an Ouroboros enclosing a sundial, its face segmented into irregular intervals. Guarded by a rotating sentinel of Swiss guards, and accessible only alongside the Vatican's chief librarian, these libraries became the repository for materials too potent for daylight study. In 1705, a clerical architect named Giovanni Battista Noli sketched a secret alcove behind the third bronze door, noting faint vibrations in the air when the chamber's lock mechanism engaged. According to a surviving memorandum, experiments conducted in that hidden recess attempted to assemble a partial chronocercuta series of interlocking wheels intended to channel temporal energy into a focused node. Though the final apparatus never materialized, fragments of its design linger in marginal notes of papal technicians who referred to relics of time requiring arcane preservation techniques. Standing before the silent shelves, one senses that these libraries hold more than forgotten tomes and dusty artifacts. They cradle the dormant remnants of an ambition to master time itself, locked away beneath the watchful gaze of centuries of church authority. Late one evening in March of 1797, as the Vatican prepared for the looming arrival of French troops under General Berthier, an unassuming figure appeared at the threshold of the Apostolic Palace. Witnesses describe a tall man, clad in anachronistic attirea, dark waistcoat, lined with intricate filigree, not seen since the early 1600s, and boots, fashioned in a style centuries out of fashion. He spoke flawlessly in ecclesiastical Latin and carried a brass hourglass filled with an unusual green-tinged sand that never seemed to settle. Escorts who guided him through the colonnade of Bernini's St. Peter's Square noted that he cast no reflection in the polished marble, and that cathedral candles flickered wildly in his presence. According to a report filed by the Papal Swiss Guard on March 12, the visitor requested admission to a private chamber where, by one account, he placed the hourglass into a hidden recess beneath a prayer kneeler before vanishing without a sound. His disappearance prompted an urgent inquiry by Cardinal Ercole Consalvi, who would later negotiate the Vatican's terms with Napoleon's emissaries. Consalvi's diary entry from March 13 tersely notes, "A visitor unbound by time," though he offers no further detail. The record was subsequently classified and obscured during the restoration of papal archives after 1814. Some historians suggest the man stepped through a momentary tear in the temporal fabric created by the chaos of invasion. Others propose he was a master illusionist, exploiting fear and superstition. Yet in private correspondence, a curator of papal antiquities, alluded to retrieving the green sand hourglass, its grains unchanged by centuries, before locking it away in a vault sealed by Pope Pius VII. To this day, the tale of that traveler endures as one of the Vatican's most tantalizing mysteries, a question of whether a lone soul briefly bridged past and future within these sacred walls. In the vaulted corridors of the Vatican's refined artwork, angels are often depicted holding scrolls or trumpets, yet few have noticed those clutching remarkably intricate gears and circular loops within their extended wings. These iconographic anomalies appear in a handful of Baroque frescoes and sculpted reliefs commissioned during the papacies of Urban VIII and Innocent X, primarily in the Chigi Chapel and the niches of St. Peter's atrium. Art historians note that in Carlo Fontana's restoration drawings from the 1680s, angels bearing gear-like objects were quietly catalogued under celestial instruments, though no descriptive text survives to explain their precise function. Some theorize these devices symbolize divine mastery over time, but certain engravings preserved in the Vatican's graphic arts collection show astonishing mechanical precision fine tooth profiles on miniature wheels and calibrated arcs, suggesting actual engineering diagrams. One statue in the Pauline Chapel illustrates an angel pressing its palm against a circular plate inscribed with zodiac signs, reminiscent of early astrolabe design. These features rarely appear in printed guides of sacred art, implying they were intended to be recognized only by initiates versed in both theology and mechanical theory. Defenders of orthodoxy dismissed such details as mere artistic flourish, yet correspondence between the sculptor François Duquesnoy and the Jesuit polymath Athanasius Kircher in 1642 hints at collaboration. Kircher supposedly supplied Duquesnoy with sketches of heavenly orreries and mechanical models to integrate into the angelic figures. Whether these celestial guardians were meant to conceal instructions for activating hidden chronometric devices, or simply to glorify divine order through art, remains uncertain. Nonetheless, the presence of these angelic mechanisms invites a reconsideration of how art, science, and sacred narrative interwove within the Vatican's grand design. Deep within the Vatican's restricted collections lies a series of ciphered folios that few scholars have had the clearance to examine. Known collectively as the Codices Aureliani, these manuscripts date from the mid-17th century and bear the unmistakable watermark of Jesuit scriptoriums. Their pages are filled with ornate calligraphy interspersed with complex alphanumeric codes, each sequence prefaced by a celestial symbol, sun, moon, or one of the known planets. In 1667, Father Athanasius Kircher penned a marginal note suggesting these ciphers concealed instructions for calibrating temporal resonance chambers. Devices, he theorized, could align human-made mechanisms with the natural rhythms of the cosmos. Correspondence between Kircher and his colleague Giovanni Battista Riccioli reveals attempts to decode the symbols as part of a broader project to synchronize pendulum assemblies with lunar and solar cycles, thus achieving a form of temporal amplification or dampening. Modern cryptographers who have peeked at transcriptions describe a multi-layered cipher, an outer shell written in a variant of Vigenère, masking inner tables of numerical values corresponding to planetary hours. One fragment, labeled Codex Aural II, outlines a procedure for inscribing runic sigils onto brass platesigils said to focus temporal currents when the plates were mounted on rotating axles within a sealed chamber. The manuscripts were catalogued under Arcana Scriptura, but marked confidential by the prefect of the Vatican Library. During the Napoleonic plundering of 1798, most of the Codices Aureliani were relocated to a hidden compartment in the Apostolic Palace. Their precise whereabouts remain known only to a select few. The existence of these cryptic Jesuit codes underscores how the Church's most secretive engineers may have embedded temporal blueprints within seemingly innocuous theological treatises, blending theology, astronomy, and ciphercraft in pursuit of a science that dared to reach beyond mere chronology. Hidden beyond the ornate doors of the Palazzetto dell'Orologio, the Pope's private workshop remained a domain of secrecy reserved for the pontiff and his most trusted engineers. Records first mention the chamber in a 1641 memorandum signed by Cardinal Francesco Barberini, noting that Pope Urban VIII had commissioned its construction adjacent to the papal apartments. The workshop's vaulted ceiling was hung with tools of precision, micrometer calipers, balance scales, and glass tubes inscribed with alchemical tincture formulas. According to a ledger entry from the Apostolic Camera dated March 12, 1642, Urban approved an annual stipend for acquiring rare metal selectrum from Asia Minor, arsenical bronze from Germany, and trace quantities of quicksilver sourced through Jesuit missions in China. In a private letter preserved among Barberini family papers, the Pope described how he personally supervised experiments combining these alloys in crucibles heated by charcoal, fueled with imported Sicilian sulfur. The goal: to produce chronometric materials capable of withstanding extreme stresses during prolonged oscillation cycles. Within a concealed alcove, a collapsible table bore a half-assembled contraption of interlocking gears, linked to a central spindle. Period sketches attributed to papal artisan Luigi Berninia, cousin of the famed sculptor show, detailed plans for this device, labeled only as Instrumentum Domini. Local artisans who delivered components later recalled being sworn to silence under threat of excommunication, their payment sealed within envelopes stamped with the papal seal. Though official inventories list only generic items, such as laboratory apparatus, whispered accounts from Swiss guards describe overhearing a low, humming resonance and a subtle shift in the air's cadence whenever the Pope entered the workshop. When Urban VIII died in 1644, his successor ordered the room's contents to be catalogued but ultimately locked away, leaving behind only tantalizing clues of a private laboratory where the leader of Christendom had sought to master time through his own hands. Beneath layers of Baroque brilliance and gilded embellishment, several canvases within the Vatican's Pinacoteca conceal more than sacred scenes. They may encode technical schematics for chronometric activation. In the mid-17th century, painters like Pietro da Cortona and Andrea Sacchi received papal commissions to adorn private chapels with allegories of divine providence, commissioning works noted for their precise architectural perspectives and hidden symbolism. One fresco in the Pauline Chapel, long thought to depict the triumph of faith, shows a cluster of angels assembling gears alongside a partially concealed sundial. Infrared reflectography, conducted in 1000 972, revealed faint underdrawings, grid lines, and node points that align almost perfectly with measured compass coordinates on the chapel floor. Contemporary notes by the Vatican's Prefect of Fine Arts describe these underdrawings as cartographic references, though their true purpose remained unspoken. In 1665, Michelangelo Galli, a court painter, wrote to his brother that certain panels contained hidden panels resembling circuit boards, intended to be read only by those versed in both geometry and hydraulics. Local lore tells of a mosaic map beneath the chapel's marble floor, designed to channel water flow patterns into the fresco's pictorial elements, creating subtle shifts in pigment that corresponded to temporal adjustments throughout the day. Though no complete diagram has survived, fragments of related sketches reside in a private collection once owned by the noble Chigi family, showing interlocking circles labeled with Latin instructions. Press here to commence the third hour. If these painted portals truly functioned as control panels, then the Vatican's grandest artworks may have served not only to glorify God, but to operate mechanisms capable of stirring the hidden currents of time. As art and engineering converge within these sacred images, one cannot help but wonder how many masterpieces within these walls harbor secrets beyond their divine beauty. In the hushed confines of the sacristy of the choir, a confessor priest named Father Paolo Rinaldi recorded a secret that chilled him to his core. Late in 1698, during evening vespers, Rinaldi was summoned to hear the confession of an elderly monk whose voice trembled as he spoke of glimpsing alternate futures. The monk claimed that beneath the choir stalls lay a sealed passage leading to a chamber where a temporal device pulsated with an otherworldly glow. He described the machine as a series of stacked rings, each rotating at a different speed to represent past, present, and future, and recounted how he witnessed brief visions of Rome's future skyline shimmering through its center. Terrified of sacrilege, yet awed by wonder, the monk begged Rinaldi to record his testimony, fearing that his own memories would be erased by the device's power. In a codicil hidden within his journal, Rinaldi noted faint scorch marks on the chapel floor and the lingering scent of ozone and heated metal that clung to his cassock. When he reported these details to his superior, the abbot ordered the corridors sealed and the monk's confession filed under the category Spiritual Aberrations. No official record mentions this event, yet whispers among sacristans persist that a single confession shellac exists in vaults beneath the Lateran Basilica, sealed by 3 locks and entrusted only to the next confessor priest. Whether these hushed revelations speak of divine vision or the malfunction of a chronometric mechanism remains unknown. The story of the confessor's secret endures, however, as a testament to the uneasy intersection of faith and forbidden technology deep within the Vatican's hidden heart. Let that one sink in. When you're ready for the next mystery, hit subscribe. Among the Vatican's most enigmatic artifacts are small cruciform ingots of metal once held in the care of papal goldsmiths, known in clandestine records as the sacred conductors. First documented in a 1702 inventory under Pope Clement XI, these crucibles contained alloys of silver, mercury, and trace amounts of palladium element not formally identified until centuries later. According to a memorandum by Monsignor Francesco Roncalli, These metals were chosen for their purported temporal conductivity, believed to channel and stabilize the subtle energies necessary for sustained chronometric operation. Artisans crafted the ingots in a hidden forge within the Vatican workshops, tracing the cross's arms with alchemical sigils and inscribing their base with precise measurements detailed in lost pages of the Chronos manuscript. When tested in the private laboratory beneath the Apostolic Palace, the ingots reportedly emitted a faint hum and caused nearby pendulum clocks to slow by measurable seconds per hour. Observers noted that the effect persisted only while the ingots were in a low one-frequency magnetic field generated by a rudimentary coil, itself powered by a water-driven dynamo connected to the Vatican's aqueduct system. In correspondence now sealed by the prefect of the Vatican Library, a papal engineer named Lorenzo Santini described experiments wherein multiple ingots formed a circuit intended to amplify temporal modulation, yet cautioned that prolonged exposure risked destabilizing local time rhythms. When Pope Clement XI learned of these trials, he ordered them placed under direct papal supervision, yet after his death in 1721, the sacred conductors vanished from the official catalogue. Rumors speculate they were encased in lead and buried beneath the foundations of St. Peter's, awaiting rediscovery only when the Church deemed itself ready to wrestle with the full weight of time's power. Bound by solemn oaths and entrusted with the Vatican's most sensitive mechanical knowledge, the silent guild of clockmakers known as the Conservators of Chronos operated in seclusion beneath the Vatican's bell towers. Founded in the late 1600s, this clandestine fraternity swore never to speak of their creations, ensuring that marvels of precise engineering remained concealed from prying eyes. Their leader, Francesco della Valle, was a master horologist who had apprenticed under the famed Genoese clockmaker Giovanni Battista Volpatti before entering papal service. Records indicate that della Valle and his apprentices crafted a magnificent orrery of silver and brass in 1689, its intricate gear train capable of modeling planetary movements down to the arcsecond. Yet, beyond celestial representation, these artisans developed a secondary mechanism series of nested gears and escapements designed to alter the rate of timekeeping by infinitesimal degrees. In a workshop adjacent to the Clementine Hall, the conservators calibrated trials using pendulums whose lengths could be adjusted by micrometer screws, a technique they refined into a device they called the temporis regulator. Contemporary testimonies by Vatican guards speak of nights when the tower's great clock tolled an impossible number of chimes, suggesting brief accelerations or delays in its mechanism. Although official inventories list only standard clockworks, private ledgers kept under lock and key document the creation of prototype regulators intended to test the boundaries of local time. When Pope Innocent XII ordered the guild disbanded in 1700, fearing theological backlash, the conservators dispersed, taking their secrets with them into retirement. Yet fragments of their designs survive in sketchbooks tucked behind loose bricks in the workshop's walls, waiting to be rediscovered by those daring enough to reconstruct a machine that once dared to rewrite the very seconds of history. In the hidden reaches of the Vatican's architectural marvels, reports emerged of sanctums that defied both gravity and chronology. During renovations in the 1730s beneath the Clementine Hall, workers uncovered a sealed sub-hog chamber whose ceiling was supported not by stone columns, but by an intricate lattice of fine gold wires anchored into bedrock. According to an engineer's report penned in 1737 by Giuseppe Galli, these wires formed a tension network that allowed the chamber's central platform to float a precise fraction of an inch above its base, a phenomenon he described as levitas controllata, controlled lightness. Galli noted that while the platform remained nearly weightless under normal conditions, it gained sudden heaviness when weighted with objects marked by the cruciform ingots, suggesting an intentional modulation of gravitational interaction. Contemporary accounts preserved in the archives of the Fabbrica di San Pietro speak of the platform's surface tilting imperceptibly during equinox ceremonies, aligning with hidden markers on the walls that corresponded to celestial events. A letter from Cardinal Niccolo Caracciolo in 1740 hints that these shifts were interpreted as a way to draw the sacred closer to the heavens, though some curious observers whispered that the effect mirrored temporal adjustments rather than spatial ones. Subsequent investigations by papal architect Luigi Vanvitelli noted residual magnetic fields and irregular pendulum swings among instruments placed on the floating dais, implying a broader experiment in gravitotemporal coupling. When Pope Benedict XIV succeeded in 1740, he ordered the chamber sealed and its mechanics dismantled, fearing the unholy blending of earthly mass and temporal flux. Yet fragments of Galli's diagrams survive, sketched on vellum and tucked into mortar crevices, describing how artful engineering once created a sanctuary where space and time converged in a silent, suspended communion. In a vaulted antechamber adjacent to the Vatican Library's music archive, scholars have uncovered a collection of 18th-century musical manuscripts that transcend mere liturgical composition. These hidden symphonies, as they are discreetly catalogued in a 1754 inventory under Pope Benedict XIV, bear notations indicating unconventional time signatures and rhythmic patterns encoded alongside Gregorian chant. The scores, penned by an anonymous maestro, referred to only as Maestro S, employ interlocking pulse motifs designed to resonate with specific auricular frequencies. According to a contemporaneous letter from the Vatican's Maestro di Cappella, the compositions were performed in a sealed chamber beneath the sacristy, where walls lined with resonant marble allowed sound waves to focus on a central brass plate inscribed with alchemical sigils. Musicians who participated in these clandestine rehearsals later reported physical sensations of temporal distortion, slow, dreamlike dilation of moments during decrescendo passages, and an accelerated rush of time within staccato sequences. In 1761, Father Lorenzo Bianchi, an organist at St. Peter's, recorded in his diary how the closing fugue of a hidden symphony caused candle flames to freeze mid-flicker for several heartbeats, then resume as if no interruption had occurred. Although the Vatican's official records treat these manuscripts as experimental musical curiosities, marginal annotations in the maestro's hand outline a theory of chronosonic resonance, wherein carefully structured harmonies could synchronize local time pulses within an enclosed space. When Pope Clement XIV suppressed the chamber in 1769 amid concerns over unorthodox practices, the scores were dispersed among private collections. Only a handful of original folios remain in the archive's restricted music vault, accessible under the strictest security. These surviving fragments hint at a lost form of sonic chronometry, a fusion of music and mechanism intended to entrain the ebb and flow of time itself through the art of sound. In the mid-18th century, an extraordinary paradox gripped the Vatican when Pope Benedict XIV, himself a scholar of canon law and philosophy, chose to personally oversee clandestine trials of temporal modulation on willing novices. Under his commission, a select group of low-ranking monks were invited into a chamber adorned with scrying devices and arrayed with prototype chronoscopes built by Jesuit engineers. These men, sworn to silence, stood at the center of a circular brass frame linked to a complex array of pendulums and alchemical conductors. According to detailed but hidden reports in the Archivio Segreto, Benedict observed as the monks recited liturgical prayers to steady their heartbeats, while the mechanism adjusted its gear ratios to subtly accelerate or decelerate the local flow of perceived time. In one account, a monk's candle remained lit for nearly 2 hours during a recorded minute of objective time, only to extinguish the instant normal chronology resumed. The Pope, fascinated by the ethical implications, posed a series of questions about identity and memory. If a man's subjective experience of time could be stretched or compressed, would his soul remain anchored in its original moment, or drift beyond divine providence? Benedict's paradox, recorded in private correspondence with his personal theologian, was that by granting humans limited mastery over their own temporal perception, one risked unraveling the unity of divine eternity and human history. Concerned that such experiments might undermine faith in God's unchanging nature, he ultimately ordered the devices dismantled and the monks dispersed to remote monasteries. Yet the records he preserved pose enduring questions. Can subjective time be altered without fracturing spiritual continuity? And does a slender distortion in chronology threaten the very foundation of moral responsibility? In 1764, a brilliant engineer named Francesco Lorenzi dared to speak publicly of a device that could bend seconds to human will. Lorenzi had served under the conservators of Kronos, and later under papal commission, constructing precision gear trains and testing chronometric conductors. Yet, when he began publishing essays on temporal crucibles in clandestine scientific journals circulating among European courts, the Church deemed his revelations too dangerous to contain. Summoned before a special commission of inquisitors, Lorenzi defended his work as a pursuit of divine order through the laws of creation. But ultimately, he was branded an innovator who risked unraveling the fabric of history. In 1765, he was stripped of his titles, his laboratory sealed, and his designs confiscated. Rather than face imprisonment, Lorenzi fled Rome under cover of night, carrying only a single satchel containing blueprints for a portable chronoscopia compact device, whose interlocking wheels promised temporary local pauses in the flow of time. He found refuge in the Republic of Venice, where his chronoscope prototype fascinated noble patrons and circulating scientists. Lorenzi's diaries from this period, now fragmentary and housed in the Biblioteca Nazionale Marciana, describe late-night demonstrations in Venetian palazzos, candles dimmed, watches stalled, and guests felt a tremor in their perception of reality. Yet Lorenzi lamented a constant fear that church agents would capture him and destroy his work. He died in exile in 1772, his chronoscope never fully operational, and his final journal entry warning that to master time was to court obsession and despair. Though Lorenzi's full designs were lost, whispers persisted that he smuggled critical components into the Vatican itself, ensuring that fragments of his vision would survive within the very heart of the institution that sought to silence him. Scattered throughout the Vatican's reliquaries are fragments of objects venerated for their proximity to the divine shards of saints' relics, splinters of the true cross, and threads from the veil of Veronica. Among these sacred items, a small subset bears unusual provenance, relics reputed to distort local time when brought into contact with calibrated chronometers. One such artifact, catalogued in a 1782 inventory under Pope Pius VI, consists of a splinter of wood claimed to originate from Noah's Ark, encased in silver and displayed in a lead-lined reliquary. According to a memorandum by Cardinal Leonardo Antonelli, supervised experiments conducted in 1790 involved placing the reliquary atop a precision pendulum within the Vatican Observatory's auxiliary chamber. Observers recorded a temporary suspension of the pendulum's oscillation for nearly 10 seconds before it resumed its regular rhythm despite no mechanical fault. Another relic fragment of cloth associated with St. John was tested in 1801 within the papal workshop, where technicians noted that pocket watches worn by assistants gained or lost consistent increments of time when placed adjacent to the cloth. These outcomes prompted further trials under Pope Pius VII, who approved discrete funding in 1810 for the study of these temporal effects. Reports describe how gilded reliquaries, lined with mercury-treated cork, appeared to magnify the relic's influence, leading to more pronounced shifts in small timepieces. Though church doctrine insisted these phenomena arose from divine favor rather than mechanical interaction, private letters between Vatican curators hint at an intention to integrate such relics into larger chronometric assemblies. By the mid-19th century, as scientific rigor tightened, relic-based experiments were officially discontinued, and many corresponding records were archived under sacred phenomena. Yet these relics remain on display, their true power whispered only among a handful of scholars and custodians who recognize that within those fragments lies not only sanctity, but the potential to bend the very fabric of time. Beneath the vast expanse of St. Peter's Square lies a secret mosaic, concealed by centuries of cobblestones and daily foot traffic. In the early 18th century, during renovations ordered by Pope Clement XI, workers discovered a series of tessellated tiles bearing a spiral pattern of interwoven circles and lines. According to a hidden report in the Apostolic Archive dated 1715, the mosaic was part of a grand design by architect Carlo Fontana to mirror celestial harmonies on the earth below. Yet, marginal notes by a Vatican engineer named Pietro De Luca suggest a more audacious purpose. The pattern mapped out temporal convergence nodes, points where local time might be amplified or diverted when activated by specific astronomical alignments. De Luca's sketches, preserved on vellum and now filed under lock and key, show the mosaic spiral traversing an exact number of Roman paces that correspond to the synodic periods of Jupiter and the Sun. He theorized that stepping along the spiral on designated feast days would synchronize an individual's biochronometer with cosmic rhythms, allowing brief glimpses of future moments or the echo of past events. Secret late-night measurements in 1723 by a Jesuit surveyor confirmed that the mosaic's granite and marble tiles possessed slight variations in density, engineered to channel subtle vibrational energies into the basilica's foundations. Pilgrims who unwittingly crossed the pattern at dawn spoke of moments when their watches slowed or raced, while guards stationed there reported sensations of déjà vu as though caught in a temporal loop. When Pope Benedict XIV learned of these anomalies, he ordered the mosaic to be reburied beneath fresh paving stones and sealed with a stone slab cut from the ancient catacombs. Only a handful of engineers and clerics retained knowledge of its exact location, leaving the Vatican's temporal map to remain buried in plain sight, a silent testament to an era when time was not only measured, but charted like the very stones of Rome. In the course of restorative work on Michelangelo's frescoes during the late 19th century, Vatican conservators uncovered hidden numerals and formulae etched under layers of plaster. Between 1882 and 1885, under the direction of artist-restorer Giuseppe Belli, small fragments of the Sistine Chapel ceiling were removed for cleaning, revealing faint geometric inscriptions in the lunettes depicting the ancestors of Christ. These inscriptions, rendered with a thin red ochre, correspond to ratios found in ancient Vitruvian architecture and include precise proportions matching the movements of a pendulum of specific length. Belli's confidential report, filed in a secured annex of the Vatican Library, details his astonishment at discovering a series of arcane symbols alongside these ratios notations that translate roughly as stabilitas temporalium, or temporal stability. When scholars of the Pontifical Commission examined adjacent fresco patches in 1886, ultraviolet imaging revealed further inscriptions beneath layers of whitewash applied during earlier efforts to conceal them. These newly exposed markings formed part of a larger network of interlocking circles and triangles that, when mapped onto the ceiling's curvature, align with the azimuthal paths of the solstice sunbeams that move across the chapel's floor. It is believed that this restoration code served as an embedded schematic for a chronostabilization mechanism, intended to harness seasonal light variations to regulate local time. Although the physical apparatus linked to these instructions has never been found, the coded fresco underdrawings remain as cryptic blueprints, suggesting that the ceiling itself was conceived not only as an artistic masterpiece, but as a vast control panel, awaiting activation by those versed in both sacred geometry and the science of chronometry. In a cramped alcove of the Vatican Library sat the lone figure of archivist Matteo Ricci, whose life's work was to catalog the Church's most precious texts. By the spring of 1802, he had spent decades organizing scrolls, parchments, and leather-bound volumes, each bearing the weight of centuries of scholarship. Yet his greatest discovery was not a tome, but a series of coded marginalia pointing to a secret mechanical library hidden beneath the lecture room. Ricci's journal entries from that time describe the thrill of unearthing faded symbols that hinted at blueprints and gear trains beyond any known clockwork. He recounts the moment when he first located a concealed panel behind a shelf of patristic writings, revealing a narrow corridor lined with iron racks and crates stamped with unfamiliar alchemical signs. Fear mingled with exhilaration as he recognized components for pendulums and coils stored in dust-covered boxes. But alongside his excitement came dread. Ricci worried that preserving these artifacts might draw the suspicion of church authorities committed to doctrinal purity. Night after night, he wrestled with a sense of betrayal, torn between the historian's duty to record and the cleric's vow to protect sacred mysteries. His lament, penned on March 14th, spoke of sleepless nights haunted by the ticking resonance of hidden machinery, and of a conscience burdened by knowledge that could challenge the Church's very understanding of creation. In his final entry, Ricci warned that the pursuit of temporal secrets carried a price more costly than exile, the shattering of one's faith in the steady march of history. Before he could act on his decision to reveal or conceal the cache, Archivist Ricci vanished without trace, leaving behind only his quill still poised above an empty page. A pause is good, but the secrets don't stop here. Subscribe and stay close. Behind a panel of carved oak in the Apostolic Palace stands a heavy bronze door stamped with a circular seal inscribed in ornate Latin script. Unmarked on any public map, this door was installed in 1724, at the behest of Pope Benedict XIII, to guard a chamber designated for experiments deemed too potent for daylight study. The door's seal bears a sigil combining symbols of the sun and moon, flanked by enigmatic glyphs that resemble alchemical runes. According to a confidential memorandum drafted by Monsignor Luigi Carafa in 1725, turning the door's wheel lock required a sequence of 4 rotations keyed to specific hours of the lunar cycle. Only then would the inner chamber unlock without triggering a failsafe that would seal it forever. Inside, vaulted shelves hold sealed glass jars containing brass fragments etched with temporal equations and panels of brass engraved with arrays of dots and lines functioning as glyphic barriers. Papal watchkeepers assigned to the door reported sensing a faint vibration in the stone floor whenever the lock was engaged, as though the chamber were attuned to unseen currents. A fragment of correspondence from Cardinal Corsini suggests that the seals were designed to maintain a stasis field, preventing any leakage of temporal energy into the rest of the palace. When Benedict XIV's restoration projects began in 1740, the door was reinforced and its mechanisms refined, but its purpose was never formally recorded. Only a handful of curators and papal technicians hold access codes, and even they speak of the chamber in hushed tones. In these sealed recesses, glyphs and seals serve not to protect gold or documents, but to lock away the very possibility of bending time, ensuring that whatever lies beyond remains hidden until the Church deems the world ready to confront such power. Throughout the 18th century, funding for temporal research quietly reshaped the contours of papal politics, as popes and cardinals leveraged financial support for chronometric projects to secure alliances with European courts. Under Pope Clement XII, the Apostolic Camera diverted portions of its annona, the tithe revenues from grain and olive oil, towards secret endowments managed by the prefect of the Vatican Library. These funds purchased rare alloys, precision lenses from London workshops, and water-powered dynamos from Dutch engineers. In return, Catholic monarchs such as Charles VI of Austria received privileged access to preliminary findings, strengthening diplomatic ties amid shifting balances of power. Financial ledgers from 1733, recently declassified, list entries under Temporis Fundus, showing substantial payments to Jesuit and Olivetan specialists whose experiments aimed at modulating the passage of hours. Correspondence between Pope Benedict XIV and the courts of Bavaria and Parma reveals how supporting such research enhanced the Vatican's influence in secular affairs, granting the Church a reputation not only for spiritual authority, but for cutting-edge innovation. Yet these financial networks also created tensions. Rival cardinals accused one another of using temporal grants to curry favor, leading to discreet investigations by the Camerlengo's office. When economic crises struck Rome in the 1760s, some patrons withdrew support, causing key projects to falter and prompting clandestine appeals for foreign subsidies. Ultimately, the infusion of money into chronology blurred the line between sacred mission and political maneuvering, as church leaders recognized that control over time itself could become the most potent currency of all. Within the hush of Vatican nights, an uncanny phenomenon surfaced among the marble corridors and candlelit chapels: the sound of silence. In 1785, during routine maintenance of the Apostolic Palace's acoustic design, papal artisans discovered a small chamber beneath the Sala Regia where sound behaved inexplicably. According to a private report by the building's architect, Luigi Camporesi, voices spoken inside the room fell silent at the stroke of midnight, while clocks halted their ticking for precisely 11 minutes before resuming their regular pace. Reports preserved in a sealed codex note that these intervals of stillness coincided with the alignment of the Moon and Jupiter as calculated by the Gregorian Tower Observatory. Curious investigators placed tuning forks and water clocks within the chamber, only to find that neither instruments nor human conversation could penetrate its boundary during the silent phase. A Jesuit engineer named Pietro Vanini hypothesized that hidden gears linked to a subterranean chronometer temporarily absorbed both sound energy and temporal motion, diverting them through a network of insulated conduits that lay buried in the palace foundations. His notes reference a prototype device codenamed the Silentium engine, though he never disclosed its exact location. Pilgrims who unwittingly passed over the chamber's concealed hatch reported waking moments later, with no memory of entering, guided only by the faint echo of their own footsteps returning to normal speed. High-ranking prelates debated whether this phenomenon represented divine intervention or the culmination of centuries of chronometric experimentation. Ultimately, the chamber was sealed with a stone slab engraved with scripture from the Book of Psalms, and all references to the sound of silence were struck from official inventories. Yet in the Vatican's oldest guard books, entries continue to record mysterious intervals marked simply as hours without echo, suggesting that an enduring secret lies buried beneath Rome's Sacred Heart. On a storm-lashed evening in November of 1798, the conclave convened beneath the Sistine Chapel to elect a new pope amidst the turmoil of French occupation. As cardinals gathered under the flickering glow of candelabras, an unaccountable humming resonance filled the vaulted hala vibrations so subtle that many dismissed it as the wind churning through St. Peter's windows. Yet, according to the memoirs of Cardinal Bartolomeo Pacca, a small cohort of prelates sensed a deeper force at work. The hidden chronometer tucked away in the Apostolic Palace's private workshop had begun its clandestine cycle. Midway through the mass of ballots, whispers spread that the humming corresponded precisely to the ticking of a mechanism buried beneath the floor. Its pulse synchronized to celestial alignments calculated by the Gregorian observatory. Witnesses later described how, at a critical juncture in the voting, the hum crescendoed into a low, mechanical thrum and then abruptly ceased, pausing all movement in the chapel for a breathless moment before normal sounds and motion resumed. Some cardinals claimed their sense of time had fractured, recalling debates that seemed to span hours yet had passed in mere minutes. While official conclave records make no mention of the incidents, citing only procedural continuity, Pacca's diaries hint that a select few believed the device's intervention influenced the election's outcome, favoring the candidate deemed most amenable to preserving the Church's temporal secrets. In the days that followed, Pope Pius VII ordered an inquiry into the strange occurrence, yet directed all findings to be sealed within the archives. The episode of the Conclave Interrupted endures as one of the Vatican's most enigmatic intersections of faith and technology, raising questions about whether the highest councils of the Church have, at times, moved not by divine will alone, but by the calculated heartbeat of a hidden machine. Deep within the bowels of the Apostolic Palace, concealed behind layers of frescoed corridors and centuries-old stone, lies the so-called Cardinal's Volta Chamber, whose existence is known to only a handful of Vatican insiders. Commissioned in 1702 by Cardinal Pietro Ottoboni, and completed under the supervision of papal architect Carlo Fontana, the vault's massive door is forged from lead-reinforced bronze, its surface embossed with the Ottoboni family crest and arcane symbols denoting celestial events. The door's lock, a complex mechanism of interlocking gears and tumblers, requires not only a set of ornate brass keys, but also precise astrological alignment. Legend holds that it will open only when the sun, moon, and Mars occupy specific degrees across the ecliptic, a condition that occurs but once every 61 years. Inside, the vaulted ceiling is vaulted further still by a delicate lattice of iron beams, and the walls are lined with carved wooden cabinets containing glass tubes, brass coils, and vellum scrolls inscribed with cryptic formulas. In 1724, a young Jesuit scholar named Emanuele Lazzari documented an experiment in which these cabinets were activated by a series of clockwork triggers synchronized to the Vatican Observatory's planetary tables. Witnesses reported a sudden hush, as if the room itself suspended its breath, followed by a low hum that resonated through the stone, leaving their personal timepieces off by several minutes. Subsequent attempts to replicate the phenomenon failed when the required astrological conditions did not coincide, reinforcing the impression that the vault's powers are governed by cosmic law rather than human craftsmanship alone. Over the centuries, custodians of the vault have observed that even the faintest misalignment of stars prevents the mechanism from responding, suggesting that this secret chamber was designed not solely as a repository for forbidden knowledge, but as a sanctified nexus where divine timing and engineered precision converge. In a modest workshop tucked behind the Vatican's menacing facade, a rugged craftsman, known only as the Tinker, toiled over contraptions far removed from the grandeur of papal ceremonies. His workstation, situated in a forgotten annex near the Swiss Guard barracks, was strewn with fragments of brass and copper, tiny gears salvaged from clocks that once kept time in the observatory and pendulums rescued from Inquisition-sized devices. According to a brittle journal recovered by a Vatican restorer in 1922, the tinker arrived in Rome around 1710 under a false name, bearing letters of recommendation from an obscure noble house in Mantua. He attracted the discreet attention of a Jesuit engineer who offered him sanctuary in exchange for his craftsmanship. Witnesses recall the day the tinker demonstrated his masterpiece, a circular frame no larger than a dinner plate, embedded with concentric rings of miniature sprockets and a copper coil wound around its rim. When connected to a simple pendulum and set in motion, the assembly caused the pendulum's swing to slow imperceptibly for several minutes before returning to its normal rhythm. The tinker, perspiration beading on his brow, insisted the device was merely a proof of concept, a humble tool to illustrate the principles of temporal modulation. Yet higher-ranking clergy who observed the demonstration spoke of an odd sensation of floating, as if gravity and time had momentarily loosened their grip. Rumors that the tinker's creation sparked both fascination and fear led to his abrupt disappearance. His workshop shuttered, and his notes classified under Miscellanea Mechanica. No record survives of his fate, but his legacy endures in whispered tales of a humble artisan whose hands briefly shaped seconds, and whose simple yet profound invention challenged the Vatican's deepest convictions about the nature of time. Hidden within the Vatican's Apocrypha vault lie tattered pages from texts known as the Forbidden Gospels, removed from the official canon during the Council of Trent, yet preserved under secret directive. Among these is the Gospel of Chronos, a vellum manuscript written in the late 4th century by a Syrian monk expelled for heretical teachings. Its surviving fragments, transcribed into Latin in 1683 by a Jesuit scholar, contain passages describing journeys through the corridors of days and visions of future cities. One section recounts how the author, guided by an angelic figure, entered a chamber where time's flow was visible as a river of light, and where stepping stones carved with prophetic symbols allowed passage forward or backward along its course. These descriptions mirror accounts from later Vatican engineers who experimented with chronoscopes and temporal crucibles. In a sealed memorandum from 1752, Cardinal Giuseppe Spinelli references these apocryphal tales when advocating for discreet study of the manuscript's theological implications, suggesting its symbolic imagery may encode functional diagrams for machinery capable of traversing temporal pathways. While church authorities officially condemned the text as allegorical, secret marginalia in a copy held by the prefect of the Vatican Library outline a literalist interpretation, mapping verses to geometric designs. These designs bear uncanny resemblance to diagrams found in Jesuit ciphers and the Codex Temporis, hinting at an intentional preservation of the Gospel's coded knowledge. Though the physical manuscript remains locked away, its echoes in later chronometric projects underscore how theological myth and mechanical ambition coalesced within the Vatican's hidden archives, forming a lineage of thought that dared to imagine holy time as both scripture and structure. In a secluded chamber beneath the Vatican's Sacristy of the Sacraments, an altar of obsidian and silver stands as the focal point of whispered experiments long since erased from the official record. Commissioned in 1699 by Pope Innocent XII, the altar's surface is etched with a labyrinthine pattern of interlocking circles and hourglass motifs. Designed by an anonymous artisan whose name appears only in a single censored footnote of the Fabbrica di San Pietro's ledger. According to a confidential report dated 1702, the altar functioned as the culmination of the Vatican's time-fold experiments, channeling energy from adjacent chronocircuits into a central focal point. Operatives described placing a specially treated quartz crystal within a shallow recess at the altar's center, upon which the engraved patterns would glow faintly by torchlight. When the crystal was rotated in precise increments measured by concealed brass dials, the altar emitted a low hum and produced a localized distortion in time. Observers reported witnessing slow-motion movements of incense smoke and the unreadable flicker of candle flames stretching into languid arcs. A Jesuit engineer named Francesco Boschi, who oversaw these trials, noted in his private diary that the altar's effect peaked at the moment of consecration during midnight masses, suggesting a ritual component essential to its operation. After a mishap in 1703, during which a novice allegedly vanished for several hours before reappearing disoriented, the altar was dismantled in secret and its components dispersed among hidden repositories. Only fragments of its design survive in a single vellum sketch, tucked into a misfiled archive, hinting at the altar's dual role as both a liturgical focus and a conduit for temporal energy. The altar of the ages remains a haunting relic of the Vatican's most daring pursuit: to collapse past and future into a single sacred moment. In the summer of 1712, amid a series of unexplained disruptions in papal schedules, Pope Clement XI was reported to have momentarily vanished from his private study in the Apostolic Palace. Witnesses described the pontiff entering the chamber at dusk and, when attendants returned to deliver evening liturgy items 10 minutes later, finding the room empty and the candles still burning. A discreet inquiry, documented in a sealed memorandum by Chamberlain Carlo Colonna, notes that the Pope reappeared in the adjoining gallery nearly 6 hours later, disoriented and clad in the same robes he had worn at his disappearance. His personal diary, later classified under privata and accessible only to his immediate successor, contains a single entry: "I stepped into the quiet chamber and emerged on the other side of time." Although the quiet chamber's location was omitted from formal palace plans, later accounts by Cardinal Alessandro Albani reference its existence: a small antechamber adjacent to Clement's study, accessible via a hidden panel behind a tapestry. Local legend holds that the chamber housed a device akin to the altar of the ages, its mechanisms reconfigured to create a more profound temporal displacement. Clement's reluctance to speak of the experience suggests both wonder and fear, as though he glimpsed futures or pasts that challenged his earthly responsibilities. When Pope Innocent XIII succeeded him, the quiet chamber was sealed indefinitely, its entrance concealed and its keys divided among 3 cardinal custodians. The incident became one of the Vatican's most closely guarded secrets: the Pope who vanished, a living testament to the perilous promise of stepping beyond the ordinary flow of history. In the vaults of the Vatican's central archives, scholars have long noted an anomaly in the papal record: an entire century of documentation appears to have been expunged. Official chronologies leap from the year 1284, at the close of Nicholas III's pontificate, to detailed entries resuming only in 1382 under Urban VI. Early attempts to reconcile this gap yielded conflicting inventories, suggesting that thousands of documents ranging from financial ledgers to diplomatic correspondence were deliberately removed or destroyed. A confidential memorandum attributed to Cardinal Giovanni d'Andrea in 1394 laments the loss, hinting at the intentional erasure of material related to temporal experiments pursued during the late 13th century. Contemporary references in private letters describe years swallowed by silence and contain veiled allusions to a failed chronomantic project overseen by a coalition of alchemists and clerics seeking to extend divine providence into human history. Some historians theorize the Vatican deliberately excised records to bury evidence of catastrophic temporal trials that resulted in unpredictable rifts in local chronology, while others suggest a deliberate cover-up following an incident so scandalous that even the Inquisition deemed it unfit for posterity. Surviving fragments of cartulary, entry-stuck into margins of related volumes, mentions sudden revisions to feast days and inexplicable overlaps in papal decrees, as though multiple versions of the Church's timeline had intersected. Efforts to reconstruct the missing century rely on incidental citations in foreign archives, but the Vatican's own registries remain silent, their lost pages consumed by an institutional impulse to conceal the Church's most perilous foray into time's uncharted depths. Rest your mind, you've earned it. But when the next veil lifts, be here, subscribe. In 1401, amid calls for reform and whispers of heresy, the Vatican sought to rescue its wavering reputation by entrusting a devoted archivist, Brother Angelo Marini, with the task of recovering and safeguarding its most controversial documents. Marini, a meticulous scholar who had served under Pope Boniface IX, became the sole custodian of the hidden chronomantic records, thought lost during the Dark Age interregnum. His tenure, from 1401 to 1432, is marked in private memoranda as the archivist's redemption. While publicly cataloging ordinary theological texts, he secretly restored fragments of expunged manuscripts, relighting the embers of temporal inquiry under oath of unbreakable silence. Surviving marginalia in Marini's copy of Augustine's City of God reveal coded references to brass phosphor bronze devices once used to measure the pulse of days. He described in secret missives how he diverted a portion of the Procibulci, papal annual stipend, to commission faithful artisans to reconstruct partial prototypes, integrating relic-infused conductors into their gear trains. When the Council of Constance threatened to suppress any lingering chronomantic lore as dangerous superstition, Marini successfully argued that these studies advanced the Church's understanding of divine order. In gratitude, Pope Martin V secretly granted Marini a private vault within the Lateran Palace, where he concealed both original artifacts and reconstructed devices behind false walls. By the end of his life, Marini had orchestrated the preservation of a lineage of temporal knowledge, ensuring that when the Vatican later chose to bury or display its secrets, his careful stewardship would allow future custodians to reclaim the Church's most dangerous legacy. In the dark hours following sunset, 1756 saw a covert operation launched to neutralize a rogue chronometric prototype that threatened the stability of Vatican time itself. The device, rumored to be an experimental fusion of hydraulic regulators and alchemical conductor shad, been misappropriated by a disgruntled technician named Matteo Rossini, who believed the Church should unleash its power to rewrite history. Word reached Pope Benedict XIV that strange temporal incidents plagued the Borgo district, where clocks stopped or raced unpredictably. He discreetly authorized an elite team led by Monsignor Pietro Ferrara, whose mission was to infiltrate the Palazzo dei Conservatori, retrieve the device, and dismantle it before it could cause irreparable ripples through time. Under cover of darkness, Ferrara's operatives breached Rossini's workshop, encountering a humming contraption of brass pipes and spinning gyroscopes that emitted a low-frequency vibration. According to the after-action report, Ferrara himself placed his hand on the main control wheel, feeling the room's temporal field warp around him, stretching his perception of minutes into moments that passed in the blink of an eye. As dawn approached, the team succeeded in disabling the machine by extracting its central crystalline Corian iridescent shard, treated with sacred oil sand, transporting it back to the Vatican. There, under direct papal decree, the core was encased in lead and submerged in the Tiber's deepest basin to neutralize its powers. The remaining components were scattered among distant archives, their blueprints consigned to oblivion. The Vatican's dark hour thus ended not with divine intervention, but with calculated resolve, illustrating that while the Church had once courted mastery over time, it ultimately chose to bury its most dangerous secrets beneath the currents of history. Among the Vatican's most closely guarded artifacts is a single vellum blueprint known as the Priceless Blueprint, believed to contain the distilled essence of all chronomantic knowledge accumulated over centuries. Commissioned in 1723 by Pope Innocent XIII, the document was entrusted to a cadre of 3 master scribes each, sworn to lifelong silence, who rendered microscopic diagrams, alchemical annotations, and Gara ratio tables across its 8 pages. According to a confidential 1725 memo by the prefect of the Vatican Library, the blueprint was intended to guide future generations in reconstructing the ultimate time machine, should the Church deem humanity ready. Its header bears a seal combining the papal tiara with a Ouroboros encircling an hourglass, symbolizing eternity's cyclical nature. For decades, the blueprint remained stored in a jewel-capped chest in the Apostolic Archive, accessible only when the keys of all 3 scribes were presented together. In 1809, as Napoleon's forces seized Rome, the blueprint was smuggled out by an underground network of Swiss guards and hidden in a monastery in the Alban Hills. It resurfaced discreetly during the restoration of papal authority in 1814 and was returned to the Vatican, where new custodians encrypted its margins with multiple cipher layers drawn from Jesuit codices. Modern attempts to decipher these annotations reveal cross-references to the Codex Temporis and the Aureliani ciphers, suggesting that the priceless blueprint serves as both master plan and Rosetta Stone, uniting diverse temporal projects under a single design. Though a complete translation has never been achieved, fragments of its schematic surface in shadowed sketches among private collections, tantalizing scholars with the possibility of recreating a device that could fold time into itself. The priceless blueprint endures as the Vatican's ultimate safeguard and greatest temptation, a single parchment capable of unleashing the most profound secret the Church has ever known. In the wake of the Second World War, whispers of Vatican leaks reached the ears of a new generation of scholars eager to separate fact from fervor. Around 1950, a group of independent historians formed a clandestine society known as the Chronos Consortium, dedicated to unearthing the Church's hidden time travel experiments. Their inquiries led them to fragments of correspondence between mid-20th century Vatican conservators and emerging physicists at the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. These letters, smuggled out by a sympathetic archivist in 1947, describe attempts to reconcile the Church's ancient chronometric lore with Einstein's nascent theories of relativity. One missive, dated April 15, 1905, reports a private audience in which Pope Pius X declared that scientific progress might at last illuminate the secrets locked away since Aquinas' day. By the 1960s, the legend grew darker with Father Pellegrino Ernetti's sensational claim that he had helped construct a device called the chronovisora, temporal viewer, capable of displaying past events as if on a television screen. Ernetti, a respected Benedictine monk and physicist, asserted that the chronovisor had shown him the crucifixion of Christ, speeches by Cicero, and lost Greek tragedies. Though mainstream scholars dismissed these tales as hoaxes, Ernetti's scholarly reputation and the Vatican's permanent silence fueled enduring speculation. Rumors swirled that top physicists and even discreet Vatican funding had backed the project, making the chronovisor the ultimate forbidden instrument proof that time's vault could be cracked, and human faith reshaped by eyewitness visions of history. As modern researchers continue to decode Vatican leaks, they must grapple with whether the chronovisor was a genuine marvel, a clever disinformation campaign, or a metaphor woven into the Church's secret archives. These efforts mark a shift. The Vatican's chronomantic secrets, once confined to theological debate and alchemical lore, began to face the critical eye of modern science. By the late 20th century, Vatican scholars recognized that the pursuit of temporal mastery demanded moral scrutiny as rigorous as its scientific oversight. In 1983, the Pontifical Academy of Sciences convened a confidential ethics council, drawing theologians, philosophers, and physicists to evaluate whether any society should wield the power to peer into or rewrite its own past. Behind closed doors in the Casina 4/3, delegates reviewed decades of chronometric research, including clandestine devices, the near-catastrophic collapse of the Chronosphere, and even the sensational chronovisor claims of the 1960s. Contributors noted that temporal interventions, however brief, could fracture human identity, disrupt collective memory, and imperil future generations. Nobel-winning physicists presented models showing how minute temporal distortions might cascade unpredictably through space-time, while moral theologians cautioned that claiming mastery over history risked equating humans with divine providence. The Council's final communiqué declared that knowledge of temporal mechanics must be governed by humility, affirming that the sanctity of history outweighs the temptation to alter it. They recommended transparent, collaborative research, rejecting secretive unilateral experiments, and urged that any chronometric data be shared openly with the global scientific community. This landmark decision marked a turning point. The Vatican would neither pursue hidden time travel projects nor suppress scientific discourse, but would instead champion an ethical framework balancing human curiosity with reverence for time's inscrutable depths. In 1992, amidst growing public fascination with science and faith, Pope John Paul II granted a private audience to Dr. Elena Ferraro, a leading physicist specializing in gravitational wave research. Their dialogue, preserved in sealed Vatican minutes, marked the first time a pontiff publicly acknowledged the Church's engagement with cutting-edge temporal science. Dr. Ferraro presented data from interferometer experiments at CERN, demonstrating minute ripples in space-time that hinted at the theoretical possibility of localized time dilation. She outlined plans to collaborate with the Vatican's Franceschini Observatory to deploy precision timing instruments on satellite platforms efforts that resonated with earlier Vatican projects, but were now conducted transparently. The Pope, deeply concerned with the moral dimensions, asked whether such technology could ever be misused to manipulate memory or skew historical narratives. Dr. Ferraro warned that even fleeting temporal anomalies risked eroding personal identity and collective truth, urging stringent ethical guidelines. Inspired, John Paul II commissioned the Pontifical Academy of Sciences to establish an interdisciplinary task force on temporal research, bringing together theologians, ethicists, and scientists. Their mandate was to draft comprehensive protocols for responsible study of space-time phenomena, emphasizing open publication and peer review. This partnership signaled a profound shift in the Vatican's approach, from secretive experiments buried in hidden vaults to collaborative inquiry that respected both scientific rigor and moral responsibility. By bridging the gap between believers and skeptics, Pope John Paul II's initiative laid the groundwork for a new Erawan, in which humanity's timeless questions about past and future would be pursued in the light of transparency and ethical reflection. In the secluded depths beneath the Vatican's Swiss Guard barracks, a final experiment unfolded under the codename Ultima Prova in late 2005. Sanctioned by Pope Benedict XVI's Interdisciplinary Task Force on Temporal Research, this test blended centuries of hidden lore with 21st-century technology. Engineers assembled a compact resonance chamber within a reinforced concrete vault, its cylindrical walls lined with superconductive niobium coils cooled by liquid helium. A central crystalline resonator's facets inscribed with micro-etched gear patterns, drawn from the priceless blueprint sat atop a vibratio-dampening pedestal. Chronometric conductors synthesized from alchemical recipes and modern materials were arrayed in precise geometric formation around the crystal. On the night of December 12, technicians from the Pontifical Academy of Sciences and external quantum physicists initiated the test. Sensors monitored space-time fluctuations, while biometric arrays recorded observers' physiological responses. As the resonator activated, readouts showed a measurable 10% slowdown in local time within the chamber, perceptible only through high-resolution atomic clocks. Participants reported a surreal stillness candle flames hovering mid-dance and heartbeats stretching beyond normal cadence. Yet the event also triggered unexpected feedback. Electromagnetic surges knocked out power to adjacent facilities, and seismic monitors registered trembling vibrations beneath St. Peter's Square. Data logs captured erratic temporal oscillations, with readings spiking beyond safe thresholds. Recognizing the potential for catastrophic timeline disruption, Pope Benedict XVI ordered immediate shutdown. The chamber was dismantled at dawn, its crystal core sealed in lead-lined containers and submerged in the Tiber, while remaining components were scattered among hidden repositories. In a closed session, the Ethics Council concluded that Ultima Prova marked both a pinnacle of human ingenuity and a warning. The power to bend time demands restraint beyond scientific ambition. Thus, the final test closed the vault on the Vatican's centuries-long chronometric Odyssean achievement, as awe-inspiring as it was perilous. In the early hours of December 2006, the Vatican's final temporal prototype experienced a catastrophic failure later termed the collapse of the Chronosphere. Technicians had enclosed a spherical chamber lined with superconductive panels and embedded with precision oscillators designed to sustain a localized time dilation for 30 seconds. As the test commenced, power surges exceeded all safety margins, and the chamber's containment field fractured. A rapid pulse rippled through the adjoining vaults, warping clocks and electronic equipment alike. Guards on duty felt seismic vibrations beneath their feet as dial indicators swung erratically between forward and reverse readings. Recovered data logs revealed temporal measurements oscillating unpredictably, defying any known physical law. In the aftermath, engineers found the chamber's shell warped and fractured, its superconductive lining pitted by intense temporal stress. Pope Benedict XVI immediately ordered the shutdown of all chronometric initiatives, and the underground facilities were evacuated. The shattered chronosphere and its remnants were entombed beneath reinforced concrete, and all related blueprints consigned to a vault code named Oblivion. A private report to the prefect of the Apostolic Palace warned that further attempts to stabilize such technology could imperil the Vatican's sand, perhaps the world's chronological integrity. The collapse of the chronosphere thus marked both the tragic end of active experimentation and a stark reminder of the unpredictable dangers inherent in tampering with the fabric of time itself. In the wake of the collapse of the chronosphere, Vatican leadership orchestrated Stone and Silence, a sweeping operation to entomb every trace of chronometric research. Under Pope Benedict XVI's decree in early 2007, reinforced concrete vaults were poured over the underground workshops, and iron panels engraved with Ecclesiastes 3:1. To everything there is a season sealed off hidden chambers. Lead-aligned crates containing shattered components and crystalline cores were lowered into the foundations of the new administrative wing, their locations recorded only in ciphered entries within the Supremo Archivum. Thousands of folios blueprints, field logs, and coded manuscripts were interred beneath St. Peter's Square, concealed by fresh travertine pavers. Triads of cardinal custodians swore oaths of silence over each burial site, ensuring that the Church's boldest ventures into time's mysteries would remain beyond mortal reach. In private correspondence, the prefect of the Apostolic Palace described the ritual-like precision of the operation as a confession of humility before time's unfathomable depths. Rumors among Vatican staff speak of hidden sensors that would detect any unauthorized excavation, yet no public evidence exists. As marble floors settled and new archives opened, the Vatican effectively erased its greatest chronomantic secrets, locking them away beneath layers of stone and silence, a solemn testament to an ambition deemed too perilous for history to bear. In the silent aftermath of Stone and Silence, the Vatican's chronometric legacy persisted not only in buried vaults but in subtle echoes woven through centuries of church life. Monastery annals record inexplicable shifts in liturgical timing memorial masses, beginning at dawn one year and at dusk the next while. Papal historians note gaps in private diaries, where successive pontiffs referred to moments that stretched beyond mortal measure. In 2012, during restoration of the Sistine Staircase, conservators uncovered a hidden inscription carved into the stone: Tempus non sustinetur humanum. Time cannot be held by human hands. This discovery rekindled whispers that, despite the collapse of experimental chambers below, residual chronometric harmonics lingered in the bedrock beneath St. Peter's Square. Geophysical surveys detected faint electromagnetic anomalies at precise coordinates corresponding to long-buried vaults, suggesting that fragments of the collapsed chronosphere and sealed apparatus still interacted with space-time's fabric. Pilgrims strolling the marble plaza above remained unaware, yet some local guards swore they felt odd tremors at midnight, as though the earth itself pulsed with a hidden heartbeat. Scholars debate whether these phenomena are the dying tremors of a doomed project, or the enduring promise of rediscovery by a new generation daring enough to unearth the Church's most forbidden archives. As technology advances and the boundaries between myth and science blur, the Vatican's greatest secret remains dormant beneath layers of stone and silence its full power veiled from mortal reach, yet ever present in the subtle pulse of history's hidden timeline. That was one layer. Take a moment, then subscribe, and we'll go deeper next time.